Well, happy Sabbath, Shabbat Shalom, and welcome to the Sabbath service for this second day of the ninth month on God's holy sacred calendar. It's the 26th day of November 2022, and good, it looks like our stream is coming in. When we go to the homepage of cogtv.org, which you can get to if you don't remember cogtv.org, you can get to this website, our main website. We also stream live on Facebook Live Sabbath Service page and YouTube Sabbath Service channel. And what was I going to tell you? But when you go to our homepage at cogtv.org, again, you can get to that by typing in sabbath.tv. In the first window below the banner, when we're live, the live signal comes through in that first window. You can tap it and make it bigger. And then below it is the Friday night Bible study and last week's Sabbath service. And then a comment by Mr. Armstrong supporting the fact that God made him an apostle. What we're going to do today, though, brethren, while I'm operating on remote equipment and testing it out, we're going to pick up from where we left off in the Bible study last night. We got through chapter 3 of Daniel. The past few weeks we've been going through the book of Daniel. You can find some good movies on the book of Daniel online. And I watched one and it inspired me to, while we're working on getting our studio equipment back to functioning, and even with some new applications and programs we're having worked on right now, which hopefully will allow us to do the same thing we do in the studio when we go to remote locations. But in the book of Daniel, we're going to launch right into it. And again, welcome to this second day of the ninth month on God's holy sacred calendar. It's the 26th day of November 2022, just for a Roman calendar cross-reference. And November 26th, they call it Saturday. It's actually the Sabbath. And when you want to know the Hebrew calendar date, we actually have from our home page on the menu selection on the right side, we have, beside the archive videos that lets you see the most current videos, and you can even go back a full 10 years by selecting that archive video selection, where my finger is over right now. But something we've just revised, that I just revised this week, is the calendar page. When you hit the calendar button, it'll take you to a page on which, let's hit it, on which you can see the dates for the holy days, the feast days for 2023. Now, I back that off holy days to feast days because the Passover is actually not a holy day. It's the most sacred or solemn assembly day of the whole year, but it's not a holy day. It is a feast day, but not a holy day. And that'll be this year on a Tuesday night, April 4. Passover runs through the daytime of April 5. Then the evening of April 5, my cell phone is timing out on us there, so I'll keep my finger ready to keep that lighted. The evening of April 5, immediately after Passover, at sunset, it becomes the first day of unleavened bread, and that evening, April 5, we will celebrate the night to be much observed, memorializing and celebrating ancient Israel coming out of Egypt. And that's something to tell your children on that evening of celebration. That's on the first day of unleavened bread, begins the evening of April 5, daytime of April 6, and runs through the last day of unleavened bread, April 12 of the following week. Ends on a Wednesday night. There's the second Passover. For those who missed the first Passover, the date for that is 30 days after the first Passover on the 14th of the second month. Then there's Pentecost in 2023. It'll be Sunday, May 28, 2023. And then there's trumpets and atonement, Feast of Tabernacles, Last Great Day. All of those are listed for you in the first section below the banner on the calendar page. And then if you want to see the whole year, in case you got to talk to your boss about days you can work, days you cannot work, or if you got to be in a court trial or something, we have a calendar that you can print out on a page and cut out. It's a business size. You can print it on a card, cut it out. It's business card size. You could put it in your wallet. And if somebody says, hey, can you work on this day or be in court on this day or meet me for lunch or something casual on this day, you can look and say, oh, no, that's a holy day. I have to be at an assembly, a holy day assembly. And then when you run into the Hebrew names of the months that God numbered 1 through 12 and 13 in an extended year, when there's 2 Adars, Adar 1 and Adar 2, a cross-reference to the months, the month number is in the next section down, which, is helpful to be able to decode and decipher at times. And then there's more. There's some charts that I've made for determining the various holy days. And then there's some cards that go back in past years and forward to 2024. There's some charts for figuring Pentecost, depending on what day Passover is in the year. Pentecost can only come out to be the 5th, 6th, 8th, or 10th day of the 3rd month. And when you know whether Passover is on a Sunday, a Friday, a Wednesday, or a Monday, you'll know, even without counting, by looking at this chart, you'll know what day on the Hebrew calendar Pentecost falls. But when you count it, and I've got charts for counting it that you might enjoy exploring so that you can verify day 50. We are to prove all things, and here's some side-by-side charts from previous years. I left them on here, and here's holy days that go forward to 2034, and then even go backward 10 or 20 years in case you want to see what the holy days were in some previous years and what days Passover fell on various days. I've got that in various years. I've got that on the calendar page. And there's something for when you want to know when what day the Hebrew day is. You can simply hit this button called Date Today from the calendar page, and it'll open up a window that tells you what the Hebrew calendar day is for today. It's the 2nd day of Kislev. And if you look down on this chart and look up which month number Kislev is, you'll see that it's under month number 9. There it is, Kislev, spelled various different ways. There it is, that way. There it is, the way it's spelled on this calendar produced by some Jewish people that I've got a reference to. Let's see if I can get that back to the page where we were. It'll tell you what day on the Hebrew calendar today is. And today on the Roman calendar is 11/26, November 26, 2022. It's the 2nd day of Kislev. Kislev is the 9th month as you number the months, as God numbered the months. Today's the 2nd day of the 9th month on God's holy day calendar. You can see that under the selection. It's grayed out here, but it's called Date Today. I think you can see it in full. Yeah, Date Today. You can see it fully lighted up from the home page. Okay, all right. With that little reminder of how you can see past videos, and if you go back one year, if you go into the archive video page by hitting this archive video button, let's see, what did I do? I'll go back to the home page if I can get it back there. Let's see. Okay, you always get back to that home page when you've got another page up on our site by selecting the menu items on the right side, and just where the logo is at the top. Well, there's a word that says home here, and it's grayed out on that one, but here, it takes us to home on the home page, and then whenever you've left the page, it'll take a few seconds for any live video to come back in that first banner. There it comes, our page. There's a few second delay from the time I'm actually streaming to the time you get it on your cell phone, depending on when you log in and all that. But there's a look at our homepage so that you can learn how. And when you want to review some of the charts that I've often showed on the program, there's actually a page. I got to log back in on this phone. It cuts off so quick. There's a page. If you scroll down the menu items and go to where it says charts, there's a 777 chart and a Gentile Kingdoms chart they're interactive. Now, if we go first of all to the 777 chart, you can take a look at a chart I often post. Let's turn it this way, see if it'll landscape. And there's a chart I've often displayed that shows the 7 seals and what their meanings are, and where the plain language explanation by Jesus Christ is in the Gospels is found on the bottom of these charts under their listings for the first seal, the second seal, the third seal, the fourth seal, which are active now, those first 4. The fifth seal, the Great Tribulation, being something that God's end-time apostle referred to as the next major event in prophecy. And I'll knock the page off. Let's see how to get this cell phone to get it back there. Okay, you can go to this master page. There it is. And let's see, always go back, hit that home button to get back to home page. And the menu items, if you go down there, let's see, we got the 777 chart, and it shows the next major event in prophecy as being the fifth seal that's not open yet. And let's go to the next one here, the one that's labeled as Gentile Kingdoms. Press that button. I got them big enough, hopefully, to get your finger on. This is an interactive chart. And by interactive, if you press on some of the listed items here, it'll either show you a picture, or if you press on the picture, it'll explain the word. Well, or it'll make everything disappear. Let me see. Let's see if we can get it to go back. Okay, got it back. If you press on some of these pictures, if you just hold your finger on it, now on this iPhone, it's doing funny, weird stuff. On a desktop computer, when you press on it, it simply toggles between the picture and text. And that's the way that interactive feature works. Now, if you can just press it lightly enough, it's supposed to just give you the text only. All right, this is a new phone. I don't know if I can say I'm not really happy with iPhone as much as I hated Android. I think I'm going to try a Pixel phone next. But anyway, let's see. Back to that. I wanted to try and make that go back. There it is. Anyway, that's under that. You'll find that under the chart that's labeled Gentile Kingdoms. We got that whole thing there, and instead of just text as it showed in the Revelation Unveiled at last book, I dropped the pictures in that relate to it. And yeah, on these were the pictures of the kings, or the pope, or not the popes, but the beast kings, the first 5 of the 7 kings here. You push their picture and it'll tell you the text of who they are. It just toggles between text and a picture. And there's Napoleon, for example. He was the 5th of the 5 kings that are fallen that we were discussing last night from Revelation chapter 17 and verse 10. We spent a little time going through that. That relates very much to this book of Daniel. The 6th king was Mussolini. There's his picture. You press on his picture, it'll toggle in the text. And then there's a question mark for king number 7, who we're watching for, who, as verse 8 of Revelation 17:10 tells us, there's one yet to come. He'll become the 7th head of a Roman Empire. He'll be selected by the 10 horns. And on this particular beast, the beast from the land, that 7th head has 10 horns that are concurrent, not consecutive like the 10 horns on the beast from the ocean. There's 2 beasts in chapter 13 of Revelation. The beast from the ocean, the beast from the sea, the ocean, and this starting in verse 11, the beast from the land. And that beast from the land has the 7 heads on it that represent the last, that picture or extend from the last horn of the 10 horns, and the last 7 of those 10 horns from the beast from the ocean. That extends over to the beast from the land. And you can understand that a lot better with this spreadsheet in front of you. And then, like, again, here's Mussolini. If you hold your finger on this picture, it'll toggle. It's supposed to toggle over to the text, like it does for Napoleon. Napoleon's kingdom, French head, crowned with Pope's endorsement and presence, even though Napoleon grabbed the crown out of the Pope's hands and put it on his own head, but he was crowned on December 2nd, 1804. And he lost the Battle of 1814. The Battle of 1813, he lost it in the spring of 1814. It's called the Battle of 1813. Let's see, Mussolini's supposed to toggle. There he is. Garibaldi united Italy from 1870 to 1845, and with that uniting of Italy, Mussolini came along and got a concordant from the Vatican, and he went in and invaded Ethiopia. It says as of 1936 here in this chart, but the history books show that he claimed his Julius Caesar status as Il Duce and having revived the Holy Roman Empire in 1934, from 1934 to 1945. And yeah, I'm going to recheck those dates because no, let's see, 1935 it would be. Yeah, late 1935, the fall of 1935 to the spring of 1945, Mussolini had 9.5 years reign as the 6th king. The one is of Revelation 17, verse 10. We went through that last night in some detail. I'm not going to flip there this morning. If we have a little time when I finish this chapter, I might go back and hit that for you again. But that's in last night's Bible study as we went back and forth between Daniel and Revelation. All right, I said we're going to pick up from where we left off with chapter 3. First, just a real quick review from chapter 3. I'm going to try to get this screen back to our homepage. Yeah, so I can occasionally monitor and see that our signal is still live. And we are. So just a quick review now from chapter 3 of Revelation. Excuse me. In short, in summary, what happened in chapter 3 was Nebuchadnezzar made this great image of gold, 60 cubits, approximately 90 to 100 feet tall, image of gold. Now, and you know, in the previous chapter 2, King Nebuchadnezzar's dream he saw a great statue, and God revealed the dream of that statue and through Daniel, who told King Nebuchadnezzar that this statue represents the world ruling governments, of which there will be 4 major divisions. And you, O King Nebuchadnezzar, God has made the head of gold. The head of gold represents you as the first world ruling emperor. Well, as that head of gold, that kind of went to King Nebuchadnezzar's head, because in chapter 3, he makes a 90 to 100 foot tall idol of this image of gold, of the head of him. And he placed it in the plain of Dura, where people could see it for miles around. No buildings, no construction, no obstacles around this big plain of Dura. And then he makes a declaration. He dedicates this image, and the heralds cry aloud a command that all people, nations, and languages, when they hear the music from the cornet, the flute, the harp, the sackbut, the psaltery, the dulcimer, and all kinds of music. They're to fall down and worship the golden image that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. And whoso would not fall down and worship that image, the very same hour they'd be cast into the midst of a burning fiery furnace. And we reported there how Daniel's three comrades, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, were seen refusing to fall down and worship that beast. So in verse 12, we saw how they were reported to the king with men saying, "There are certain Jews, O king, that you've set over the affairs of the province of Babylon, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. These men, O king, have not regarded you. They serve not your gods, nor worship the golden image that you set up." And this made King Nebuchadnezzar very angry. He had the men to be brought before him, and after they answered him in verse 17, saying, without regard to him, they say, verse 16 especially points out that they answered King Nebuchadnezzar, "We're not careful to answer you in this. We're not going to heed your decree or give you regard. We worship the great God of heaven." And so King Nebuchadnezzar said, "Well, if you don't, I'll give you a second chance here. When you hear the music, just bow down and worship the image." And they said, "No, we're not going to do it. We're not careful to answer you. We're not going to do it. You can throw us in that fiery furnace, and if it be so, our God whom we serve is able to deliver us from the burning fiery furnace. He's able to, and he will deliver us out of your hand, O king. Even if he lets us burn in that furnace, he'll still deliver us. He'll deliver us out of your hand, because he'll resurrect us." You know, they understood that. They understood the resurrection. But if he doesn't rescue us out of the fire, the burning fiery furnace, "Be it known unto you, O king, that we will not serve your gods, nor worship the golden image that you've set up." Well, King Nebuchadnezzar had been angry with these guys, but after they tell him this, give him this fat lip, godly fat lip, King Nebuchadnezzar becomes full of fury. And the form of his visage was changed against Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. The form of his visage changed. His face probably became blood red. And he then commanded that they should heat that furnace these guys would be thrown in 7 times more than usual, than it was wont to be heated. And as you read the rest of the story, we went through it, the very men that bound Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And do you notice Daniel's not included in this? Daniel did not go into the burning fiery furnace. He's in an upcoming chapter with being thrown into the lion's den, and by himself, not with Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Only Daniel went into the lion's den. When we watched the movie and observed that point, a friend and I, we were in our discussion after the movie, said, a lot of people probably thought Daniel went into the burning fiery furnace with Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. But no, the scriptures very clearly point out that the fourth man seen in the furnace that they saw walking around in the furnace, as verse 25 shows, is like the Son of God, and not like a regular, ordinary human. And all 4 of them came out, after the fourth one disappeared, and Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, when they came out of the fiery furnace, not a hair of their heads, verse 27 points out, they saw all the princes, governors, captains, and king's counselors being gathered together. They saw these men come out of that fiery furnace with their bodies. The fire had no power over their bodies, nor was an hair of their heads singed. Neither were their coats changed. Even their clothes didn't burn. And there wasn't even any smell of fire on them, nor the smell of fire had passed on them. And then verse 28 shows how King Nebuchadnezzar spake and blessed the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And he promotes these men to an office. It points out in the last verse of chapter 3. Okay, let's go ahead with chapter 4 now. Chapter 4 is King Nebuchadnezzar is going to have another dream. He's going to see a tree, but not just an ordinary tree. Now, in the Garden of Eden, there were 2 trees. The tree of life, which Adam and Eve would have been able to have eaten freely from if they had not eaten from the other tree, the 2 trees, the second tree being the tree of death, known as the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. You know, the tree of death, you consider the name of that tree, it not only has evil on it, it has good on it too. And it has to, because that tree is used by the devil as a counterfeit to the truth. And he's going to, the things he gives you off that tree, he's going to make it look as much like a counterfeit money printer, will make his counterfeit money look as much like the real thing as he possibly can. So that tree of the knowledge of good and evil will emphasize a lot of good. It'll sometimes even cause people to criticize the people of God because they see people who are eating off the tree of death and doing evil. They see them doing a lot of good. They go out of their way to do good things. But don't be deceived by this. Those people are also doing evil things. They're not keeping the Sabbath. They're not either the weekly or the annual. And they're stealing from people and just doing all kinds of evil things. But they're not going to let you see that as much as they can. They're going to keep that in secret, do that in secret, or do it with deception, and yet make you think they're the best people in the world, because they'll go out of their way to, especially when the spotlight's turned on, to do good things. So you'll talk about, look at that good thing that person did. Yeah, well, go watch them at night. You may see a totally different person, when they're not in the spotlight, when they're in secret. And, if you could read their thoughts, some of these people doing good things, what they're thinking is how they can steal things from you and get your stuff and do you dirty and talk about you behind your back, all kinds of things. So don't be deceived, brethren. The Bible says, trust no man until you learn by his reputation of doing that he does good and that he's genuine through and through. Now listen, all of us can make mistakes. We can, we have to learn. We have to learn to be wise. And sometimes that takes time. And sometimes it takes a lot of prayer, and sometimes it takes prayer with fasting. But we are to be growing. God called the weak of the world. He called the cream of the crud, as some have said. But let's go on now with chapter 4. King Nebuchadnezzar has another dream. This dream is about a tree. It's going to be shown in this chapter as being a tree that has two things about it that are emphasized by God, that it's going to be an extremely tall tree that stretches all the way to the heavens. It's going to be a strong tree, and it's full of life. A tree that's full of life, but it's going to be chopped down, left as a stump, but not a dead stump. That it's going to have life even in that stump. And this is going to picture, as you'll see in a moment, how King Nebuchadnezzar, for his arrogance, is going to be cut down and become like a stump in the woods. He's going to become as if he were an animal and even eat grass like an animal. Let's go through this. Nebuchadnezzar, the king, verse 1, unto all people, nations, and languages that dwell in all the earth. He comes to them with a greeting of peace. Peace be multiplied unto you. And he says, I thought it good to show the signs and wonders that the high God has wrought toward me. Now, this sounds like a good King Nebuchadnezzar. He's learned that God put him in office as the first world-ruling emperor. God's given him all kinds of majesty, all kinds of riches, great palace and great vineyards and servants. And so he's praising God's name as he says, look what all God's done for me. Peace be multiplied to you. I thought it good to show you the signs and wonders that the high God has wrought toward me, verse 2. And in verse 3, he emphasizes how great are his signs and how mighty are his wonders. His kingdom is an everlasting kingdom, and his dominion is from generation to generation. Boy, oh, King Nebuchadnezzar is really praising God. We should praise God. And in verse 4, King Nebuchadnezzar says, I was at rest in my house and flourishing in my palace. And verse 5 shows while he was resting, he saw a dream, which made him afraid. And the thoughts upon his bed and the visions of his head troubled me, the king says in verse 5. Therefore I made a decree to bring in all the wise men of Babylon before me, that they might make known unto me the interpretation of the dream. Then came in, verse 7, the magicians, the astrologers, the Chaldeans, and the soothsayers. And in this case, he told them the dream. I told the dream before them. And even being told the dream, they didn't make known unto me the interpretation thereof, the king says. But, verse 8, but at last Daniel came in before me, whose name was Belshazzar, according to the name of my God, a Babylonian name, and in whom is the spirit of holy gods. And before him I told the dream, saying, O Belteshazzar, master of the magicians, because I know that the spirit of the holy gods is in you, and no secret troubles you. Tell me, he says in verse 9, we're going to flip the page, he says, tell me the interpretation of this dream. Tell me the visions of my dream that I've seen and the interpretation thereof. He asked Daniel to give him the details of his dream and tell him what the dream means. And verse 10, thus were the visions of my head and my bed. I saw, and behold, a tree. Now he goes in and tells Daniel what he saw. Behold, a tree in the midst of the earth, and the height thereof was great. This was a huge, tall tree. You're going to see the tree grew, verse 11, and was strong, and the height thereof, as I mentioned before, reached unto heaven. That's how tall it appeared to King Nebuchadnezzar, and the sight thereof to the end of all the earth. Big, huge, humongous tree, filling the whole earth. The leaves thereof were fair, and the fruit thereof much, and in it was meat for all. The beasts of the field had shadow under it, and the fowls of the heaven dwelt in the boughs thereof, and all flesh was fed of it. This was a fruitful tree. All right, I'm just checking our signal again. My other computer timed out. Bear with me a second. I'll be right back with you. Just make sure we're still live. And, all right, we are. And we're in verse 14 now. Verse 13. Let's review verse 12 again. The leaves of this tree were fair, the fruit much, meat for all beasts, they took shadow under it, the fowls of the heaven, they dwelt in the boughs thereof, and all flesh was fed of it. In verse 13, I saw in the visions of my head upon my bed, and behold, a watcher and a holy one came down from heaven. He cried aloud and said thus, hew down the tree, and cut off its branches, shake off its leaves, and scatter its fruit. Let the beast get away from under it, and the fowls from its branches. Nevertheless, leave the stump of his roots in the earth, even with a band of iron and brass in the tender grass of the field, and let it be wet with the dew of heaven, and let his portion be with the beast in the grass of the earth. Let his heart be changed from man's, and let a beast heart be given unto him, and let 7 times pass over him. In prophecy, a time is a year. So 7 times would be 7 years in prophecy. Here's a verse I have extra highlighted in this small Bible, because this is a verse that you can use if you are following a principle of knowing that God sets over men those who rule. This matter is by the decree of the watchers, and the demand by the word of the holy ones, to the intent that the living may know that the Most High rules in the kingdom of men, and that Most High gives the kingdom of men to whomsoever he will. And God sets up over it, over the kingdoms of men, he sets up rulers who are the basis of men. Does that mean God is setting up great men to rule over people? No, not if you take this verse literally, read it. It says he sets up over the kingdoms of men the basest of men. Um, those with the lowest character. Now, you know, all through the time when many people would be praising a former president, the former president just before the present president, for doing many great things, and he did many great things. But if you occasionally watch some of the videos either about or of or from Ben Shapiro, perhaps you'll observe as I have, that Ben Shapiro did not vote for Trump. I'm not sure he voted for the other side either, but he wasn't for Trump, and he would speak out about it, you know, because he saw flaws in Trump, even though Trump did and he would acknowledge the good and the great things that the former president did while he was in office. But here you can see, and the point that Ben Shapiro recognized and would point out some of the flaws of the former president. I simply mention that to support this verse that God sets up over the kingdoms of men the basest of men. And yet there have been some who were able to do good and could tell, who were good actors in Hollywood movies and carried that characteristic over in their presidency and could charm people and speak eloquently and tell good jokes and scare people because he played a gunslinger in a lot of movies and he could scare our enemies in other nations. But here King Nebuchadnezzar has this dream, verse 18. This dream I, King Nebuchadnezzar, have seen. Now you, O Belteshazzar, the Hebrew name of Daniel. He's asking Daniel to declare the interpretation thereof. For as much as all the wise men of my kingdom are not able to make known unto me the interpretation, but you are able. The king knew from previous times with Daniel, when Daniel interpreted the dream he had in chapter 2 of the great image, he knew you are able. And he gives the reason, not because of just you alone, Daniel, but because the spirit of the holy gods is in you. He knew that Daniel had God's Holy Spirit. He knew Daniel had a closeness with God, and God would reveal this dream to him through Daniel. Verse 19, then Daniel, whose name was Belteshazzar, in the Hebrew, not the Hebrew, but in the Babylonian language, when Daniel was told this dream and understood the interpretation of it from God, he was astonished or astonished for 1 hour. For a whole hour. It was like Daniel was stone drunk. Well, maybe that's not the best way to say it. He was just astonished. He was taken back. It was like, wow, this is an incredible thing. This tree represents an incredible thing that God is going to do to King Nebuchadnezzar. And his thoughts troubled him, as it says here in verse 19. Troubled Daniel about what he understood was going to happen to the king. And with Daniel sitting there not saying a word, just looking astonished, taken back, not able to speak, the king spoke up and said, Belteshazzar, Daniel, let the dream or the interpretation thereof, don't let that dream trouble you, Daniel. Belteshazzar answered and said, my Lord, the dream be to them that hate you, and the interpretation thereof to your enemies. Oh, your enemies are going to gloat over the meaning of this dream. They're going to cheer and be, you know, how your enemies, they applaud when you are in trouble. You know, they're glad to see you in trouble. They'll try to help increase trouble against you. Your enemies, I'm talking about. And so this verse says, Daniel said, my Lord, the dream is to the glory of them that hate you. The interpretation thereof will make your enemies gloat over what they're going to hear. Verse 20, the tree that you saw. Daniel goes ahead and starts to tell the king what this dream of this great tree means. The tree that you saw, which grew and was strong, whose height reached unto heaven, and the sight thereof to all the earth, whose leaves, verse 21, were fair. This was a healthy tree, and the fruit thereof much, and it was meat for all, under which the beasts of the field dwelt, and upon whose branches the fowls of the heaven had their habitation. It is you, verse 22, O king, you art grown and become strong, for your greatness is grown. You know, King Nebuchadnezzar started out this chapter praising God for the greatness God had given him. I thought it good, verse 2, to show you the signs and wonders that the high God has wrought toward me. How great are his signs and how mighty are his wonders. You know, King Nebuchadnezzar praising God for the great things God lavished upon him. But here in verse 22, Daniel is telling the king, it's you, O king, that are grown and become strong, for your greatness is grown and reaches unto heaven, like the great tree reached to heaven. King Nebuchadnezzar's greatness reached unto heaven, and your dominion reaches out to the end of the earth, just like that great tree spread out could be seen from the whole earth. And whereas, which is what it said in verse 20, the tree that you saw, which grew and was strong, whose height reached into heaven, and the sight thereof to all the earth, it could be seen to all the earth, and that the King Nebuchadnezzar's dominion was to the end of the earth. And verse 23, whereas the king saw a watcher and an holy one coming down from heaven and saying, hew the tree down, and destroy it, yet leave the stump of the roots thereof in the earth. So this tree was not just like the beast that's going to come out of Revelation 17, verse 8 in duality. It's come once in the form of Mussolini ascending from the abyss, from the bottomless pit. And the duality will have the seventh king of Revelation 17, verse 10, the seventh dynasty, the seventh and last king, who in duality will be the second one to ascend from the abyss, is just like this. It's like the stump that's left with roots in the earth. With those roots, the tree can regrow. It's not totally killed, even though you cut off the whole tree and just left a stump. The roots are still good. That tree can regrow. Just like those beasts that are resting now in the abyss. From a deadly wound they will be healed and will ascend one last time, as the other that has not yet come, of verse 10 of Revelation 17. We'll go read that before we close up the service today and remind ourselves of how we are waiting for a future prophecy where a beast representing an emperor, like King Nebuchadnezzar was an emperor of a world-ruling empire, and we've got a seventh king who represents an emperor who will ascend from the beast and will revive the Holy Roman Empire for its seventh and final time on the earth. And here the king is being told that this tree pictures his strength and his greatness and his dominion. And verse 23, whereas the king saw a watcher, a holy one coming down from heaven and saying, hew down this tree and destroy it, yet not completely kill it. You destroy it, but don't completely kill it. Leave the stump of the roots thereof in the earth, even with a band of iron and brass. God is going to assure with a band of iron and brass that the life of this tree be preserved, and all this left in the tender grass of the field, and let it be wet with the dew of heaven, and let his portion be with the beast of the field till 7 times pass over him. There again, the 7 times, 7 years. He's going to have his portion be with the beast of the field. This, verse 24, is the interpretation, O king, and this is the decree of the Most High, which is come upon my Lord the king, that, verse 25, they shall drive you from men, and your dwelling shall be with the beast of the field, and they shall make you to eat grass as oxen, and they shall wet you with the dew of heaven, and 7 times 7 years shall pass over you till you know that the Most High rules in the kingdom of men, and gives it to whomsoever he will. Here's another verse. Brethren, friends, you should probably want to circle verse 25 of Daniel 4, as well as the verse we circled earlier over here in verse 17. God sets up over the kingdoms of men the basis of men. He gives it to whomsoever he will, and he sets up the basis of men when he gives it. Verse 25 says similarly at the end of the verse, till you know that the Most High rules in the kingdom of men. You know, men are cut off from God, but he still is involved with setting up who the leaders of men are, and he gives it to whomsoever he will, just as it said in verse 17 over here on the other page. And after saying he gives it to whomsoever he will in verse 17, it adds line upon line, precept upon precept, here a little, there a little. You need to also get this fact that God not only gives it to whomsoever he will, he's made it his will to set up over the kingdoms of men during this time, while the God of this earth remains before the day of atonement, until as long as the devil's still on the throne of this earth, spiritually over this earth. God sets up over the kingdoms of men the basest of men. So your best men aren't even running for office, or if they are running for office, God's not going to let them be chosen. That they drive you from men. God gives it to whomsoever he will. In verse 26, whereas they commanded to leave the stump of the tree roots, your kingdom shall be sure unto you after you shall have known that the heavens do rule. Wherefore, verse 27, O king, let my counsel be acceptable unto you, and break off your sins by righteousness. You know, put the sin out of your life, king, and by righteousness. And your iniquities, put them out by showing mercy to the poor, if it be a lengthening of your tranquility. So if you want to come back and rule for a long time, be sure you're exercising righteousness and mercy. Verse 28, all this came upon the king Nebuchadnezzar. And then verse 29, at the end of 12 months, he walked in the palace of the kingdom of Babylon. After having this dream, he had 12 months before the execution of this dream is going to take place. A whole year passes by. And so the king walks into the palace of the kingdom of Babylon. In verse 30, the king spake and said, oh boy, now listen, if you didn't recognize that there was some arrogance, even as he's praising God in the beginning verses of chapter 4, how great are his signs. God's made me the greatest thing on the face of the earth. How great God is. Well, yeah. Somebody sets you up in a high office, somebody gives you precious gifts, or you're going to think they're the greatest person in the world. And they make you great and establish you well. Well, boy, that's a great person. But look how great they made me. I'm great. And then it goes to his head. And so here we're seeing at the end of a year, he walks in the palace and he's speaking words of great arrogance. He's forgetting God now. You know, people have a way of doing, they forget who gave you the gifts and set you up and established you well. Look what he's saying here in verse 30. The king spake and said, is not this great Babylon that I have built for the house of the kingdom of Babylon, by the might of my power, and for the honor of my majesty? What happened to all these great words about God we were seeing over here? You know, how great are God's signs and how mighty are his wonders. I thought it good to show you the signs and wonders that the high God hath wrought toward me. All right, that's what he was saying back in verse 2, but look over here in verse 30. What's he saying here? This great Babylon that I have built for the house of the kingdom. He was talking about this kingdom of Babylon, by the might of my power and for the honor of my majesty. What happened to all this wonderful praise for the great high God and him wrought the good things upon Nebuchadnezzar? Well, as you can see, brethren, friends, that's long forgotten by the time we get to verse 30 and 31. Verse 31 says that as a result of that arrogant speaking by King Nebuchadnezzar in verse 30, while the word, verse 31, was in the king's mouth, he's still spouting off these wonderful things of his, in arrogance of his might and power and majesty. While the word was in the king's mouth, there fell a voice from heaven saying, O King Nebuchadnezzar, to you it is spoken, the kingdom is departed from you, and they shall drive you from men, and your dwelling shall be with the beast of the field. They shall make you to eat grass as oxen, and 7 times shall pass over you until you know that the Most High rules in the kingdom of men and gives it to whomsoever he will. But then you see here, verse 32 is another one. We had verse 25, verse 32, and especially verse 17 that says God gives the ruling of the kingdoms of men to whomsoever he will. And verse 17, be sure you keep this reference, chapter 4. And God sets up over the kingdoms of men the basis of men. So when you're unhappy about what your government's doing, and you're complaining about your leaders, and you know that God sets your leaders up over you, he's giving us what we deserve. If we would practice righteousness like Roger Babston said, I'm not sure I've got his name exactly right, but many of you remember God's end-time apostle Herbert Armstrong speaking of Roger Babston, speaking before a Rotary group and explaining to the men there that when 51% of the people do good and do righteousness, it's like this barometer on the wall that when the weather is 51% humidity, it's going to rain, or 51% or greater. You know, there's going to be a reciprocal, a certain percentage of rain expected by that high percentage of humidity. And when it's converse to that, when it's dry, well, no rain. He said that principle is similar to what happens in the country. When 51% or more of our people are righteous, God blesses us, and he gives us basically a good leader, even though that leader may still be of the basis of men. There are some leaders that can do good, and there's some that seem to only be able to fall downstairs, baffle and make everything awkward and leave our borders wide open and just allow all kinds of evil against us, more than other leaders would. And so Roger Babston said, when 51% of the people or more do evil, then God lets us have what we deserve. And that's just like the blessing and cursing chapters that you can read. There are 2 of them. They tell you when you obey God, you get all kinds of blessings, both individually and collectively as a nation. And then the second part of each of those 2 chapters, I think they're Leviticus 26 and Deuteronomy 28, if I'm remembering them correctly. The second part of each of those chapters say, on the other hand, if you don't obey God, you individually and you as a nation reap the curses. And so here's verse 31. While the word of his arrogance was in the king's mouth, there fell a voice from heaven saying, O King Nebuchadnezzar, to you it's spoken, your kingdom is departed from you, and they shall drive you from men, and your dwelling place shall be with the beast of the field. They shall make you to eat grass as oxen, and 7 times, 7 years shall pass over you until you know that the Most High ruleth in the kingdom of men, and giveth it to whomsoever he will. Verse 33, the same hour was the thing fulfilled upon Nebuchadnezzar, and he was driven from men, and did eat grass as oxen. This actually happened, brethren, and the Bible tells you it did. And his body was wet with the dew of heaven. He was out there with the animals day and night, till his hairs were grown like eagle's feathers, and his nails like birds' claws. He actually became as if he were an animal able to survive outside in the wilderness for 7 years. And after those 7 years had passed, verse 34 is telling us, and at the end of the days, I, Nebuchadnezzar, lifted up mine eyes unto heaven, and mine understanding returned unto me. Instead of having the heart of a beast, he now has his understanding as a man with the spirit in man. The Job 32 verse 8, spirit in man restored fully to him. And I blessed the Most High. After 7 years of living like an animal, yes, and being returned to normal, I think any of us would. And I blessed the Most High, and I praised and honored him that lives forever, whose dominion is an everlasting dominion, and his kingdom is from generation to generation. And verse 35, all the inhabitants of the earth are reputed as nothing. And he does according to his will in the army of heaven and among the inhabitants of the earth. Oh, if men could only understand this, right, brethren? And King Nebuchadnezzar went on to say, and none can stay his hand or say unto him, what are you doing? What doest you? What do you do? What are you up to, God? None can say that to God. At the same time, verse 36, my reason returned unto me, for the glory of my kingdom, mine honor and brightness returned unto me. God fully restored him to the majesty he had had before. And my counselors and my lords sought unto me, and I was established in my kingdom, and excellent majesty was added unto me. So he got his kingship back, and he got it added back. He got it back with excellent majesty added to him in it. Now, verse 37, I, Nebuchadnezzar, praise and extol and honor the King of heaven, all whose works are truth, and his ways judgment, and those that walk in pride he's able to abase, just as he did to King Nebuchadnezzar in turning the king into a beast, an animal, for 7 years to dwell outside in the wilderness with the animals and having claws like the animals have, and yet God restored him. Now, I think we have time left to get on into chapter 5. Brethren, are you finding, as I am, even without the movie, that just reading the Word of God from the book of Daniel, which is going to get into prophecy as we go more and more, as we get further into the book, and really tie in and really strongly relate to the book of Revelation, just the words alone, straight from God's Word, from the Bible, from the book of Daniel, do you not find it to be unusually interesting and revealing? And I don't know about you, but I'm kind of excited to go further a little bit. It was wonderful to watch the movie, but they dramatized the movie somewhat, and some of the details will be left off. You got to really get into God's Word to really, really get it. Now let's see if I can tell from any of this. Let's see. I can go to we've got a special application that takes our signal and sends it to our YouTube channel, the Sabbath Service channel. It sends it over to our Facebook page, the Sabbath Service page, and it also sends it, as I showed you on the screen here a moment ago, it sends it to our homepage, so that if you're watching from cogtv.org, the first window down below the banner appears here, and only appears here as the text is when we're live. It's just a black screen when we're not live, but when we are live, you'll see the live signal on our homepage, cogtv.org, and we just send out one stream. We've got a service that resends it to YouTube and Facebook and to our homepage here. And I can go over, if I still have it on one of these devices, I can go over to it, and it should tell us, yeah, I do have it over here, I think, yes. And I can take a look and see, it says waiting for stream here. It's supposed to tell us how long we've been streaming. Yeah, well, all I can tell from the time, we still got we've got another half hour. Oh no, we got more than that. We got plenty of time to get into chapter 5. I hope you're excited like I am about what we're learning. And with just a brief pause, I'm going to continue on into chapter 5. And get a page back over here so I can monitor our signal. There it is. Make sure we're staying on. Okay, chapter 5, Belshazzar. Now this, look carefully at the words. It looks very similar to Belteshazzar, which is Daniel, but this doesn't have the T-E in it. This is just B-E-L, no T-E, S-H-A-Z-Z-A-R. Very similar to the Babylonian name for Daniel. But this is King Nebuchadnezzar's, I believe it's his son, Belshazzar, the king. So now we have a new king after Nebuchadnezzar has died. Belshazzar, the king of chapter 5 of Daniel, made a great feast to 1,000 of his lords, and he drank wine before the thousands. Now, God actually instructs those who are in office to avoid drinking wine. Now, maybe you can have a little sip once in a while with your meal. Even the Apostle Paul has a verse of Scripture that says, drink a little wine for your stomach's sake. So a little wine is good for you. But at a party, when they're filling these huge wine glasses and you're belting those down like Belshazzar belted them down, he drank till he became drunk before thousands. Verse 2, Belshazzar, whiles he tasted the wine, commanded to bring the golden and silver vessels which his father, see, Belshazzar was the son of the former king Nebuchadnezzar, which his father Nebuchadnezzar had taken out of the temple, the Jewish temple that was in Jerusalem, God's temple. And King Nebuchadnezzar had taken those golden and silver vessels from that temple in Jerusalem, that the king and his princes, in this big feast they're having, thousands, that the king and his princes at this huge, humongous party they were having, and their wives and his concubines, might drink from these vessels from the temple in Jerusalem. Verse 3, then they brought the golden vessels that were taken out of the temple of the house of God. And that temple was the house of God, which was at Jerusalem. And the king and his princes, his wives and his concubines drank from those vessels that were from the temple of the house of God. They drank, verse 4, they drank wine and praised the gods of gold and of silver, of brass, of iron, of wood, and of stone. Now listen, we have wine at Passover time. Wine's okay in moderation, but they were belting it down. They were drinking them from these sacred cups. In the same hour, verse 5, came forth fingers of a man's hand and wrote over against the candlestick upon the plaster of the wall of the king's palace. This is that hand writing on the wall, the handwriting on the wall. And the king saw part of the hand that wrote. Scared him to pieces. And then the king's countenance was changed. Yeah, frightened him, and his thoughts troubled him, so that the joints of his loins were loosed. He was knocking his knees, and his knees smote against one another. You hear about somebody, their knees knocking, they're so afraid. That's what it says right here in Old King language, King James English language. And his knees smote one against the other. His knees were knocking. The king, verse 7, cried aloud to bring in the astrologers, bring in the Chaldeans, bring in the soothsayers. And the king spake and said to the wise men of Babylon, whosoever shall read this writing and show me the interpretation thereof shall be clothed with scarlet and have a chain of gold about his neck, and shall be the third ruler in the kingdom. He's going to be given an extremely high office. There would only be one other man beside the king himself over the person who could interpret this dream to the king, because that interpreter of this dream would become the third ruler in the kingdom of Babylon, the first world-ruling empire. Verse 8, then came in all the king's wise men, but they could not read the writing, nor make known to the king the interpretation thereof. Then, verse 9, was King Belshazzar greatly troubled when none of these guys could explain it to him. And you see a hand right on the wall. And his countenance was changed in him, and his lords were astonished to see your leader and your king afraid and troubled with astonishment like King Belshazzar was. It makes the rest of the people be filled with astonishment and fear. His lords were astonished. Now, verse 10, the queen, by reason of the words of the king and his lords, came into the banquet house, and the queen spake and said, O king, live forever. Let not your thoughts trouble you, nor let your countenance be changed. There is a man in the kingdom, verse 11, there is a man in your kingdom in whom is the spirit of the holy gods. And in the days of your father, this man she's talking about, she's telling him, in the days of your father, light and understanding and wisdom like the wisdom of the gods was found in this man I'm telling you about, and it was found in him, whom the king Nebuchadnezzar, your father, the king, I say, your father made master of the magicians, made this man the master of the magicians, astrologers, Chaldeans, and soothsayers. Verse 12, for as much as an excellent spirit and knowledge and understanding, interpreting of dreams and showing of hard sentences and dissolving of doubts, were found in the same Daniel, whom the king named Belteshazzar. Belteshazzar. Now let Daniel be called, and he will show the interpretation. Then, verse 13, was Daniel brought in before the king, and the king spake and said unto Daniel, Are you that Daniel, which are the children of the captivity of Judah, whom the king my father brought out of Jewry? Are you this Jewish kid that my dad brought over here? I have even heard of you, verse 14, that the spirit of the gods is in you, and that light and understanding and excellent wisdom is found in you. And now, verse 15, the wise men, the astrologers, have been brought in before me, that they should read this writing and make known unto me the interpretation thereof. But they could not. They could not show the interpretation of the thing. And verse 16, I've heard of you, that you can make interpretations and dissolve doubts. Now, if you can read the writing and make known to me the interpretation thereof, you shall be clothed with scarlet and have a chain of gold about your neck, and shall be the third ruler in the kingdom. Then, verse 17, Daniel answered and said before the king, Let your gifts be to yourself, and give your rewards to another. Yet I will read the writing unto the king, and make known to him the interpretation. O you king, verse 18, the Most High God gave Nebuchadnezzar your father a kingdom, and majesty, and glory, and honor. And verse 19, for the majesty that he gave him, all people, nations, and languages trembled and feared before him, before Nebuchadnezzar. They held him in great respect because of the majesty that God gave him, whom he would slew, and whom he would keep alive, and whom he would set up, and whom he would put down. King Nebuchadnezzar had all that power. Those people feared before him because of that. But verse 20, when his heart was lifted up and his mind hardened in pride, he was deposed from his kingly throne, and they took his glory from him. And verse 21, he was driven from the sons of men, and his heart was made like the beast, and his dwelling was with the wild asses. They fed him with grass like oxen, and his body was wet with the dew of heaven, till he knew that the Most High God ruled in the kingdom of men. There's another verse. This is verse 21 of chapter 5, showing you that God rules in the kingdom of men, and that he appointeth over it whomsoever he will. In reading this 4 or 5 times with just God appoints over it, whomsoever God will appoint over it. Don't forget verse 17 of chapter 4 of Daniel, that is the only one, line upon line, precept upon precept, here a little, there a little. It's only here in verse 17 of chapter 4 where it adds the part with God being able and having the power and does give the kingdoms of men to whomsoever he will. It adds this last line here, and sets up over it the basest of men. Some people in rulership, they're not going to like that. They're not going to like this. They don't want to see this verse. They'd like to rip this verse out of the Bible. You know, the other verses only say God sets up over it whomsoever he will, and they can feel pride in that. Hey, I'm in office. God put me here. Well, the rest of us, don't forget the last line of verse 17 of chapter 4 of Daniel. And God sets up over the kingdoms of men, the present day kingdoms of men, the basest of men. All right. I'm sorry for laughing. I guess I should apologize. I don't know, but that's very funny to me. I mean, that's just humorous. And yet it's also not, because we have to live through having the basest of men in rulership over us. We are to pray for them, though, as we're told in the New Testament. I think it's 1 Peter. Pray for all men, and especially those who are in authority, so that we may have peace, so that these truths of God can be spread and made manifest among men, even though all men are not yet called. The book of life, you know, the book that for the judgment, God's opening books, going through what people did in their lives, even though they're not being judged now until they're called in the great white throne judgment, the second resurrection, and being told Christ's sacrifice paid the penalty of all their sins. If they just repent of their past sins, go forward, you can have this period of time. Isaiah 65 says, you know, you live to be 100, so it could be, if a little kid died young, it could be close to 100-year period that men will have to exhibit righteous living. But they will be judged from the books by what they did now. Then their judgment will be, you're worthy of death. And the worse you do, and the things that you've done that will be, reminded to you of at that time, you've got to you establish habits and things that can be hard to overcome and take effort to overcome, and that'll be a period of overcoming. If you can do some of that overcoming now, even those who are not yet called, you're better off. You're better off at that time when God is calling you before his great white throne judgment. We'll talk about that another time. Some of you know exactly what I mean. We may have some people tuning in who don't have the foggiest idea of what I'm talking about, except maybe you get kind of a gist of it. You may think, hey, I'm able to get away with all kind of stuff now. Well, yeah, because you're not being judged the way those who are called now are. And there's two callings. There's a spring harvest, there's a fall harvest. It doesn't mean you're totally left out of the picture if you're not called now. But it also does not mean you're scot-free to just go out and, hey, I get away with everything I do. Yeah, well, of course that's within reason, but you're not really getting away with it spiritually either. God's writing it down in a book, even though he's not judging you on it or calling you on it now. He's going to talk to you about it later. And you will have to overcome it. The worse you do now, the harder it's going to be to overcome it later. The better you do now, the easier it'll be for you when you have to overcome, no devil around at that time, when you have to overcome the way those who are called now have to overcome or suffer the lake of fire, the third resurrection. All right, I'm getting off into some things that some of you understand, and it's just a little reminder to you. I've got a note in my margin where I put down the word arrogance. I kept having to ask a friend, what was that A word that my friend mentioned that was synonymous with pride and lifting up yourself? But I got it in my Bible. I got it in one of my Bibles now, so I can come over here and cheat and help my old mind remember that God does not like arrogance in men. He wants to see, as Daniel is speaking to the king and saying here in verse 22, and you, his son, O Belshazzar, you have not humbled your heart, though you knew all these things about what God did to your father, drove him from the sons of men. His heart was made like the beast. His dwelling was with the wild asses. They fed him with grass like oxen, and his body was wet with the dew of heaven. He was out there all night with the animals. till he knew that the Most High God rules in the kingdom of men, and that God appoints over the kingdoms of men whomsoever he will. And verse 22, you, his son, O Belshazzar, has not, there's an emphasis on Shaz, Belshazzar, has not humbled your heart, though you knew all this. You had arrogance, failing to discern between the holy and the profane is a note that I added, because when the son of Nebuchadnezzar, Belshazzar, took those drinking vessels, those vessels from that his father had taken from the temple of God, the house of God in Jerusalem, when Belshazzar took them and drank wine in them at a big party and boasted how great he was, he got this humbling from Daniel. You've not humbled your heart, though you knew all these things about how your father had to suffer when he was arrogant. But, verse 23, you've lifted up yourself against the Lord of heaven. Daniel speaking to Belshazzar, but you've lifted up yourself against the Lord of heaven, and they have brought the vessels of God's house before you and your lords, your wives, and your concubines have drank wine in them, and you've praised the gods of silver and gold, of brass, iron, wood, and stone. And in praising these things which see not, they hear not, they don't know anything, and the God in whose hand your breath is, and whose are the ways, you have not glorified. That God who gives you your breath. Then, verse 24, was the part of the hand sent from God, from him, and this writing was written. And this is the writing that was written. Mene, tekel, upharsin. This, verse 26, is the interpretation of the thing. Mene, God has numbered your kingdom and finished it. You know, you hear sometimes, you hear people say, your number's up. You know, your number's up. God has numbered your kingdom and finished it. That's where that comes from. Tekel, you are weighed. Meaning you're numbered and your number's up. Tekel means you're weighed in the balances and you are found wanting. Peres means your kingdom is divided and given to the Medes and Persians. The Medes and Persians were represented by the silver on the chapter 2 of Daniel, great image that King Nebuchadnezzar, Belshazzar's father, saw in his dream, that again is recorded in chapter 2, that God revealed to King Nebuchadnezzar through Daniel. And that kingdom that Belshazzar inherited from his father, King Nebuchadnezzar, the head of gold kingdom, he's being told, your kingdom is divided. Half of it's given to the Medes and half of it to the Persians. And that's the silver. You know, there's two arms, just like there's two legs. So you had the silver divided up between the Medes and the Persians. And verse 29, then commanded Belshazzar, and they clothed Daniel. He kept his promise that who would interpret the dream would get these certain things. And he kept that promise. Belshazzar commanded, and they clothed Daniel with scarlet and put a chain of gold about his neck and made a proclamation concerning him that he should be the third ruler in the kingdom. And that was going to happen even though Belshazzar was going to be killed that very night. Verse 30, in that night was Belshazzar, the king of the Chaldeans, slain. And Darius the Median took the kingdom, being about 62 years old. So when Darius the Median, was 62 years old, he took the kingdom. Let's go on with chapter 6. I think we have time to do that. We have a few minutes. We can get into chapter 6 and kind of highlight it at least. Oh no, yeah, we got time. We got more time. We got more than a few minutes. Verse 1, chapter 6. It pleased Darius. Darius is the Mede who slew King Belshazzar, the son of Nebuchadnezzar. It pleased Darius to set over the kingdom 120 princes who should be over the whole kingdom. So Darius sets up his own men, 120 of them, over this new kingdom that he's taken over from Nebuchadnezzar. He's now the world-ruling emperor, represented by the silver of the chapter 2 Daniel great image, had the head of gold Nebuchadnezzar. That kingdomship has passed now to the second world-ruling kingdom, pictured by the silver breast and arms of the Medes and Persians. And so Darius sets up 120 princes who should rule over the whole kingdom. And verse 2 of chapter 6, and over these 3 presidents, of whom Daniel was first, that the princes might give accounts unto them, and the king should have no damage. Then this Daniel was preferred above the presidents and princes, because an excellent spirit was in him. An excellent spirit was in him. And King Darius could see this in Daniel. And the king thought to set him over the whole realm. Then, verse 4, what the king wanted to do did not make the other men happy at all. Let's see what's going to happen next. Just like you see people do today in this world. Then the presidents and princes sought to find occasion against Daniel concerning the kingdom. They wanted to find something the king would be displeased about Daniel, so that they wouldn't have this man over him. They could go be directly under the king themselves. But even trying to find, the presidents and princes trying to find something against Daniel, they could not. It goes on to say, but they could find none occasion. They couldn't find anything against Daniel, nor fault, for as much as he was faithful, neither was there any error or fault found in him. He had an excellent spirit. Brethren, that's what we need to strive for. Take some work, but with God's help and time, we can do it. We can overcome that junk in our lives, and we can do it. With God's mercy and love, and we are to give mercy, we can ask God to give us that mercy too. Oh God, give us. Those who are tuned into this program live this morning, give them your mercy and your love. Help them overcome. Help all of us do that, Father, and receive and learn and share with others what we learn and receive from you. Verse 5, then said these men, we shall not find any occasion against this Daniel, except we find it against him concerning the law of his God. Oh, so they're going to set up a trap for Daniel. They're going to make God's law evil, or they're going to try to turn God's law against him. So here's what they do. Verse 7, all the presidents of the kingdom and the governors. Let's back up. I didn't read all of verse 6. Then these presidents and princes assembled together to the king, and said thus unto him, King Darius, live forever. Oh yeah, they're gonna, it's called, what's it? K.A. are the initials for what they were doing. Our B.N. is another one. Initials for what they were doing. Brown nosing or kissing up to the king. Oh, live forever, King Darius. Hey, we got this plot we want to do against this guy you made over us. So we're going to come in acting like you're the greatest thing in the world. Verse 7, all the presidents of the kingdom, the governors and the princes, the counselors and the captains have consulted together to establish a royal statute in your honor, O great king, and to make a firm decree that whosoever shall ask a petition of any god or man for 30 days, except you, O king, any that ask a petition of any god other than you, or any man other than you, for 30 days, shall be cast into the den of lions. Now, O king, establish the decree, and sign the writing, that it be not changed, according to the law of the Medes, the Persians, which altereth not. Make this a permanent law that no man can alter, not even you, the king, once you sign this, can change this. Well, King Darius thought it sounded cool to him, so verse 9, wherefore King Darius signed the writing and the decree. Later he's going to be mad at these men for having duped him into doing this, but right at this moment he just dummies along with it. Now, verse 10, when Daniel knew the writing was signed, he went into his house, and his windows being open in his chambers toward Jerusalem, he kneeled upon his knees 3 times a day and prayed and gave thanks before his God as he did aforetime. He didn't let this law change his worship and praise and praying before God. Then verse 11, these men assembled and found Daniel praying and making supplication before his God. Then verse 12, they came near and spoke unto the king concerning the king's decree. O king, have you not signed a decree that every man that shall ask a petition of any god or man within 30 days, except for you, O king, if they ask anybody other than you, they shall be cast into the den of lions. Excuse me, brethren. Oh boy. The king answered and said, yeah, the thing is true, according to the law of the Medes and Persians, which altereth not. He remembered doing this, and he said, yeah, it's an unalterable law. That what you just said, that's true. Then, verse 13, answered they and said before the king, that Daniel, who is of the children of the captivity of Judah, regards not you, O king, nor the decree that you've signed, but makes his petition 3 times a day. Then verse 14, the king, when he heard these words, was sore displeased with himself. The king was upset with himself and set his heart on Daniel to deliver Daniel. He loved Daniel. Daniel had an excellent spirit. Daniel always advised him well, and the king loved him. And the king, the rest of verse 14 says, labored till the going down of the sun to deliver Daniel. Then verse 15, these men assembled unto the king and said unto the king, know, O king, that the law of the Medes and Persians is that no decree nor statute which the king established may be changed. You can't change this, king. You can't even change it. Then verse 16, the king commanded, and they brought Daniel and cast him into the den of lions. Now the king spake and said unto Daniel, your God, Daniel, whom you serve continually, he will deliver you. And verse 17, a stone was brought and laid upon the mouth of the den, and the king sealed that stone of the mouth of the den of the lions with his own signet, and with the signet of his lords. So he sealed that stone they put on the den of the lions with his own signet, and also with the signet of his lords, that the purpose might not be changed concerning Daniel. Then verse 18, the king went to his palace and passed the night fasting. This king is fasting. Let's see now. Just one moment here. We have Belshazzar in chapter 5, the son of Nebuchadnezzar, and now we have Darius, the king of the Medes and Persians, who killed Nebuchadnezzar's son Belshazzar as the new king. And, okay, so this is Darius, who loves Daniel. He had to put him in the lion's den because he signed that into law, that thing his princes and presidents came before him and praising him and causing him to do it without thinking. Now that they played this trick on him so that this law would work against Daniel, the king is in his chambers fasting. It is his palace. He's fasting through the night, as it says here in verse 18. The king went to his palace and passed the night fasting. Neither were instruments of music brought before him. He's troubled. He ain't going to party over Daniel being put in the lion's den. He's sick and sad about it. And his sleep went from him. He couldn't sleep. Then verse 19, the king arose very early in the morning after the night of fasting and went in haste unto the den of lions. Remember, he had already told Daniel, God, your God, whom you serve continually, will deliver you, Daniel. King Darius was expecting God to deliver Daniel. King fasted all night about it even. First thing in the morning, early in the morning, he goes in haste to the den of lions. And verse 20, when he came to the den, he cried with a lamentable voice unto Daniel. And the king spake and said to Daniel, O Daniel, servant of the living God, is your God whom you serve continually able to deliver you from the lions? Then verse 21, said Daniel unto the king, O king, live forever. My God has sent his angel and has shut the lions' mouths, that they have not hurt me. For as much as before him innocency was found in me, and also before you, O king, have I done no hurt. Then verse 23, was the king exceedingly glad for Daniel, and commanded that they should take Daniel up out of the den. So Daniel was taken up out of the den, and no manner of hurt was found upon him, because he believed in his God. And verse 24, the king commanded, and they brought those men which had accused Daniel, and they cast them into the den of lions, them, their children, and their wives. And the lions just had a party. And the lions had the mastery of them, and brake all their bones in pieces, or ever they came at the bottom of the den. Then verse 25, King Darius wrote unto all people, nations, and languages that dwelt in all the earth, peace be multiplied unto you. I make a decree that in every dominion of my kingdom men tremble and fear before the God of Daniel, for he is the living God and steadfast forever, and his kingdom that which shall not be destroyed, and his dominion shall be even unto the end. He delivereth and rescueth, he worketh signs and wonders in heaven and in earth, who hath delivered Daniel from the power of the lions. That great God has delivered Daniel from the power of the lions. So verse 28, this Daniel prospered in the reign of Darius and in the reign of Cyrus the Persian. Remember, the kingdom had been split. It was split, and half of it given to Darius, the Mede, and the other half given to Cyrus the Persian. This was one dynasty, or one world-ruling empire, split between the Medes and the Persians, Darius and Cyrus. All right, we made it through 2 chapters, through all of chapter 6, all of chapter 5. Oh, we made it through 3 chapters, then chapter 4, also 4, 5, and 6. And we still have time to do one more chapter. Shall we go for it? All right. Let me know if you'd like us to go on into chapter 7, and let me take a look at it. Let's see. We can get at least halfway through it. 7 is a rich chapter. Yeah, because we're going to get into some real prophetic things in chapter 7, the 10 horns and the 10 kings that shall arise, and that's really going to tie over to the book of Revelation. And so we're probably only going to get through part of chapter 7, but with the time we have left, let's start it. First, let's review what we did. In chapter 4, we had the great tree. We finished up chapter 3 where Nebuchadnezzar let the fact that he was the first world-ruling emperor and the head of gold in that statue of chapter 2 of Daniel. So he made a 90 to 100 foot, a 60 cubit, 6 cubits, and that's the height was 60 cubits. Yeah, 60 cubits. That's about 90 to 100 feet tall image of gold in the that he set up in the plain of Dura, and that resulted in them making a decree that when they played the music, everybody had to bow down and worship the image of that image of gold. And a similar thing is going to be required during the Great Tribulation. So that's this chapter very meaningful to us, even for the future. But Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were seen not falling down when they played the music, and they were thrown into a burning fiery furnace, heated 7 times greater than normal, and not a hair on their head was singed. And they got out. They were promoted. Chapter 4, we went into the great tree, the dream that Nebuchadnezzar had about a great tree that filled the earth, was very high, very strong. That represented his majesty, his dominion. And yet he spoke arrogantly against God. And for that arrogance, God turned him into an animal for 7 years, took him away from his kingdom, but didn't take his kingdom completely away from him, like a stump with roots, still having good roots, and a band of iron and steel, so that it iron and brass, so that it would represent God backing up the king and not totally destroying his kingship, just taking him away from it for 7 years. Then he's come back and restored even greater than he was before, because he got the point. And he made it himself that God rules in the kingdom of men and gives it to whomsoever he will, as it said in verse 32 of chapter 4. And then ended up with King Nebuchadnezzar in the last verse of chapter 4, extolling and honoring the king of heaven. But then he dies, and his son Belshazzar has this great feast to 1,000 lords, and drank wine before 1,000 in vessels they had taken, that his father had taken from the house of God in Jerusalem. He was still a world-ruling emperor, Nebuchadnezzar. Even though he praised God, he was still a carnal man. And Belshazzar is the one that sees that handwriting on the wall that his wife comes in and says, "Hey, there's a man that can interpret that for you." And it was Daniel, and he interprets it. Mene, God has numbered your kingdom. Tekel, you're weighed in the balance and found wanting. Perez, your kingdom is divided, given to the Medes and Persians, to King Darius with the Medes, to King Cyrus of the Persians. And then Daniel gets promoted, and Darius the Mede comes in and slays Belshazzar, Nebuchadnezzar's son, and it ends the Chaldean world-ruling empire. It now becomes the silver of the Medes and Persians. And of the 120 that King Darius sets up in chapter 6 to be over the kingdom, they didn't like it that the king Darius saw an excellent spirit in Daniel and put him over these others. So they come up with a plot to deceive the king into making a decree that for 30 days nobody can make a petition before anybody except King Darius. And Daniel continues to pray before God and gets thrown into the lion's den according to that decree that was made. And yet God delivered Daniel, just like Darius hoped he would. Darius prayed and fasted all night. And so he threw the men that had him make that decree and their wives and their children into the lion's den. And the lions, who didn't eat Daniel, had a feast off of these people that had accused Daniel. So they dug the pit for themselves. And it ends with Daniel prospering in the reign of Darius and in the reign of Cyrus the Persian. So now we begin chapter 7. In the first year of Belshazzar, king of Babylon, Daniel had a dream and visions of his head this is a recap now, upon his bed, and he wrote the dream and told the sum of the matters. Daniel spake and said, I saw in my vision by night, and behold, now this is a new dream, okay? That's the first verse was just a recap of going back to the time of the Chaldean Empire. Verse 2, Daniel spoke and said, I saw in my vision by night, and behold, the four winds of heaven strove upon the great sea. And verse 3, four great beasts came up from the sea, diverse one from another. The first was like a lion, and had eagle's wings. I beheld till the wings thereof were plucked, and it was lifted up from the earth and made stand upon the feet as a man, and a man's heart was given to it. And behold, another beast, a second like to a bear, and it raised up itself on one side, and it had 3 ribs in the mouth of it, between the teeth of it. And they said thus unto it, Arise, devour much flesh. After this I beheld, and lo, another beast, like a leopard, which had upon the back of it 4 wings of a fowl. The beast also had 4 heads, and dominion was given to it. After this, verse 7, I saw in the night visions, and behold, a 4th beast, dreadful and terrible and strong exceedingly, and it had great iron teeth. It devoured and brake in pieces and stamped the residue with the feet of it, and it was diverse from all the beasts that were before it, and it had 10 horns. I considered the horns, and behold, there came among them another little horn, before whom there were 3 of the first horns plucked up by the roots. And behold, in this horn were the eyes like the eyes of a man, and a mouth speaking great things. I beheld, verse 9, till the thrones were cast down, and the Ancient of Days did sit, whose garment was white as snow, and the hair of his head like the pure wool. His throne was like the fiery flame, and his wheels as burning fire. I'm going to stop right there for a moment, because what we just covered relates to the book of Revelation and things that Christ said in Matthew 24, Luke 21, and Mark 13. And I want to take a look and see briefly how much time we have left. And yeah, we have a few minutes, so I can do this. We want to go over to chapter 13 of Revelation and compare. We want to remember this little horn. We're going to talk about that, but we're going to get over here to Revelation 13 and notice the similarity of. Now listen, I'm very aware, by the way, while I do this, of the precaution that's given in the last chapter of the book of Revelation, chapter 22, and verses 18 and 19, because, brethren, we who follow the truth have enemies out there among us who preach against the truth we understand, which God gave to us through his end-time apostle, Herbert Armstrong. There are some who do not respect the authority or the position that God gave Mr. Armstrong, and therefore they reject a lot of the truth that God gave us on a silver platter through Mr. Armstrong. And they'll quote these verses from Revelation 22, verses 18 and 19, which say, I testify unto you every man that hears the words of the prophecy of this book. If any man shall add unto those things, God shall add unto him the plagues that are written in this book. And then verse 19, the corollary of that, if any man shall take away from the words of the book of this prophecy, God shall take away his part out of the book of life, and out of the holy city, and from the things which are written in this book. Actually, the people that are emphasizing these 2 verses, especially that verse 19, fail to realize that the facts of history and things that God revealed through Mr. Armstrong that relate to things in this book, by not having a spirit of understanding, a spirit of prophecy, by failing to have that and by speaking with the spirit and man against the truths God gives us when you understand how God does it, and they're rejecting history, they're rejecting truth, and they are actually taking away from the words of this book by failing to recognize that things mentioned in this book are happening in these latter days in historical facts that have to be tied into what God says. For example, I've given this example, I gave it in some detail last night in the Bible study. I'm just going to make a quick reference to it now, because we only have a few minutes to go here, and I got to cover a few things. But in the 17th chapter of Revelation, and in verse 10, where God says, there are 7 kings, 5 are fallen, 1 is. The Apostle John wrote this after having a vision being given to him from the Isle of Patmos. He actually stayed on the Isle of Patmos. He just was taken to heaven in vision, where the Father opened up the seals of the book of Revelation and gave them to Jesus Christ. Christ had already spoken them, as recorded in Matthew 24, Mark 13, and Luke 21 in plain language. But these seals wouldn't be lifted from what's in Revelation and Daniel until the latter days. We wouldn't understand that Christ was speaking in Matthew 24 in plain language, the revelation, the unsealing of these seals, and the revealing of what's in these seals. And verse 9, here's the mind which has wisdom. The 7 heads are 7 mountains on which the woman sits, and there are 7 kings. So we're being told these are dynasties. 5 would come not concurrently, but they would come consecutively, one after another, and then they would end. And their consecutiveness, one after another, was like the handing of a baton. There was no break in the time of the dynasties of the 5 that are fallen, from 554 AD to 1814 AD, a 1260-year consecutive but continuous period of time of rulership that represented the Holy Roman Empire, the little horn being a representative of the Vatican, a pope, that would cause it to be called the Holy Roman Empire. It would have an imperial form of governance, so that the emperors don't become emperors just because of their military might, but even though that's part of it, they're appointed by a religious leader. That's what imperial form of government means. And what I wanted to point out here, with those who ignore some of the truths that happened in history, when the Apostle when the Apostle John wrote this in 90 AD, the 7 kings that are mentioned here had not even been born yet. So you're going to have to, from the moment this is written down, there are 7 kings. You're going to have to look for those 7 kings who will come after this book has been sealed off and written. So you can't apply Revelation 22, verse 18 or 19 against this verse in Revelation 17, and there's going to be many other verses that carry the same principle or rule. You got to look to history to find out, well, these 7 kings that are mentioned, who will they be from the point of time of when the Apostle John was writing this? You'd have to look forward and say, who will they be in the future? Well, go your way, John, and go your way, Daniel. You're not going to know, and these things aren't going to be opened up and revealed till the time of the end. They can't be, because some of these things are going to happen after you've died, and I'm not going to reveal everything about it until the latter days. Now, these 5 kings, they were not part of the latter end days. They started back with Justinian in 554 and ran through Napoleon in 1814 AD. 1260-year continuous period for the 5 that are fallen. But this next part, and 1 is, this would not become the present tense as it's written. It really, at the time the Apostle John wrote this, would be, there's going to come 1 in the future who will become king number 6. He'll be king 6 while he's alive, and he won't be king 6 after he dies. And that's exactly what happened with Mussolini. He came as the one is in 1935, the fall of 1935, after he had invaded Ethiopia, after he had gotten a concordant, a writing from the Vatican. And then he proclaimed himself the new Il Duce, the new Julius Caesar, saying, I have revived the Holy Roman Empire. God caused Mr. Armstrong to understand that Mussolini was made king number 6 of the 7 kings. And his dynasty ended when he was shot in the belly on April 28, 1945, hung upside down from the canopy of an Esso gasoline station in Italy along with his comrades and mistress. And that ended the one is. That one is didn't become is until the fall of 1935, the late fall of 1935, about December, and ended in April of 1945 with the killing of Mussolini. But that did not kill the beast, because verse 8 says, the beast that was active between 554 and 1814 AD, and then became is not between 1814 and 1935, it had the first type of a beast ascending out of the abyss, the bottomless pit, with Mussolini. And this prophecy is dual. It's a duality prophecy. Mussolini was just a type of what would come, so that the one that's yet to come, of verse 10, and the other is yet to come, king number 7, and fulfill the duality of the prophecy in verse 8, a second king that would ascend out of the bottomless pit and do the rest of this, and go into perdition, so that they that dwell on the earth shall wonder with great astonishment or astonishment, and become astonied, like Daniel became astonied there when he heard how the king would become a beast for 7 years. He just sat there for an hour, couldn't say a word. He was astonied. The rest of the world is going to become astonished when this second ascension of a beast from the abyss, becoming the king number 7, the other that is mentioned in verse 10, has not yet come. When he comes, he'll continue a short space, and in that short space, he'll go into perdition, and they that dwell on the earth shall be astonished, whose names were not written in the book of life from the foundation of the world, when they behold the beast that was active between 554 and 1814, and then active again with king number 6, the one is Mussolini, between 1935 and 1945, and then all the other times was not, but wasn't totally destroyed, like King Nebuchadnezzar was not totally destroyed. He was re-given his kingship and even majesty with it. And the beast, the 7 beasts of the Holy Roman Empire, even though each one was knocked off, it was a deadly wound, but it didn't kill the overall beast factor of the Holy Roman Empire, like the former Chancellor of Germany, Angela Merkel, said, you people better look into the abyss. And as I mentioned last night, she said that during the time when Brexit was in its high moments of argument and dispute with the EU about how they would Brexit, with Theresa May having made an agreement that she didn't get her parliament to go along with. And so her agreement that she had worked out and made with the EU people became a source of argument and meaningless, and only caused more fusion in the British Parliament as they argued against their Prime Minister not having come before them ahead of time to and work with them before she proposed to the EU what they would have in the form of an agreement. And so in her upsetness, former Chancellor Angela Merkel just screamed out, you people, you don't know what you're dealing with here. You better look into the abyss. There is a sleeping beast, a sleeping world-ruling empire system that's about to arise, that's being healed, that's being shaped up underground in the abyss. And yet it's going to ascend overnight, like verse 35 of Luke 21, where Christ says, he says in verse 36, watch therefore, so you don't get caught off guard. Because in verse 35 of Luke 21, Christ says, let's see, did I cover this? There's 7 heads, 7 kings, 5 fallen, one is Mussolini, He became his between 1935 and 1945. He is no more. He's part of the 5 that are fallen now. And now there's only one left to go of the 7 kings. And the other, king number 7, is not yet come. And when he comes, he's not yet come, but he is coming. And when he comes, he must continue a short space. All right, so we kind of covered that. The beast shall ascend out of the pit, go into perdition. Yeah, we covered that. So let's flip over to Luke. We'll close up. We're running out of time now, so I'll close up with a verse from Luke 25 that relates to this, where Christ gave both a warning and tied the prerequisites and a promise into it that are pretty good. See, Luke 21, I'm at Luke 2. If you want to flip over there with me in your Bible and maybe mark it, it's a verse you should be very familiar with and be living by. And we'll get there in a moment. Luke 21. Here it is. This is Luke 21. Even it says 22 up there, it's 21 over here. This chapter starting right here at the bottom of this other page. All right. I'm just going to show you. See, we're in Luke 21. We go over here to verse 35, which is the therefore, verse 36. Watch you therefore, and pray that you may be accounted worthy to escape all these things that shall come to pass. Christ is talking about picking up with the next major event in prophecy at this point, seal number 5, which has not occurred yet. It's not begun yet. It's not opened yet in the sense of it happening. It's open in the sense of our understanding what it is, with God having given it to us today in these end times through his end time apostle Herbert Armstrong. We understand what it will be. And before he died, God's end time apostle said the next major event in prophecy will be the events that begin with the 5th seal coming into action. So the next major event in prophecy is, you could say, the opening, the true opening, the full lift the lid and let the evil things come out of the 5th seal, the Great Tribulation. And in referring to that, Christ says that Great Tribulation comes as a snare. As a snare shall it come on all them that dwell on the face of the whole earth. The French people say it real short and sweet, tout le monde. All the world, everybody in the world. This Great Tribulation will come unexpectedly on everybody in the world, is what Christ is saying here in verse 35. And he says, therefore, watch and pray, so that you won't be caught off guard, so that you can, and so you can get this promise of being accounted worthy to escape all these things that shall come to pass. And your escape is via the 2 wings of a great eagle mentioned in Revelation 12:14. And Christ tells us in the parallel chapter of Matthew 24 to pray that escape is by a flight. Revelation 12:14 is talking about flying on 2 wings of a great eagle. And in Matthew 24, Christ is telling us to pray about that flight. Pray that it not be in the winter. And since we're in the winter now, coming up into a winter, and we've had some real cold spells where I am, it's good to be reminded, to take heed, to remind yourself and take heed of what Christ said in Matthew 24. Let me make sure I'm in 24. Let's see. All right, 24 starts here, so we need to go this way and get over to verse 15, verse 20. Okay, we'll pick up with verse 20 because I'm talking about Christ saying, pray about this escape, which is by 2 wings of a great eagle. So it is a flight, and Christ says, pray that your flight, referring to this flight by 2 wings of an eagle, an escape, as mentioned in Luke 21, verse 36, that you can be accounted worthy of if you're watching and praying. And we should also include in that prayer for those who are affected by the first 4 active seals that we are to be watching and praying about, praying for the people affected by those first 4 seals. We also should add to our prayer for those people affected by the first 4 seals. We should add a prayer for ourselves that our flight, for those who are counted worthy to escape, and it can only be among those who God calls now to the first resurrection, pray that your flight be not in the winter, neither on the Sabbath day. You know, brethren, I've said many times that there are 2 categories of people today who exist who are members of God's true church. there are those who are the Luke 21:36 people who are accounted worthy to escape, and there's the corollary of that. There are those who are not accounted worthy to escape, and I've gone through it many times, and I think this would be actually a good one to close on. It relates to all this. A verse that's at the end of chapter 12 of Revelation that follows after speaking about those who are accounted worthy to escape being flown on two wings of a great eagle. They're part of the true church of God. They're part of the category of the true church of God. Who are those accounted worthy to escape? And God flashes back at the end of chapter 12 to make mention of those who are not accounted worthy to escape. And he says of those who are not accounted worthy to escape that they are keeping the commandments of God and that they have God's Holy Spirit. They have the testimony of Jesus Christ, which chapter 19 interprets those who have the testimony of Jesus Christ as having the spirit of prophecy. There's only two spirits. There's God's Holy Spirit of prophecy, and there's the spirit of man who does not understand prophecy. The wise will understand, Daniel says, those who have God's Spirit. And that's pictured by the testimony of Jesus Christ, by God's own interpretation of this verbiage in chapter 19. But here's the main thing to emphasize. The remnant of the seed of the true church of God, the second category, those who are not accounted worthy to escape, they were and they are keeping God's commandments. Even though you've got some preachers who will stand up in these various groups and say, well, them Laodiceans must not have been keeping God's commandments. Well, I say again, as I've said many, many, many times, you people that stand up in those pulpits and say that, you ought not to be allowed to speak. Not only in a pulpit, you shouldn't be allowed to speak that in the service. You ought to be flat out right disfellowshipped. You're not reading your Bible. Your Bible says in this verse, the remnant of her seed, the category of people who are not accounted worthy to escape, who keep the commandments of God. They are keeping the commandments of God. You aren't reading your Bible if you're out there preaching, well, them Laodiceans must not have been keeping God's commandments. You must not be reading your Bible. If you're going to preach, you need to know your Bible. You need to be into it a lot. You should have goals of reading the whole book as often as you can. We all should be doing that. We all should be sober. This is a very sober time. We're not the church of God in many different groups. Each one of those groups is not the church of God. The individual members comprise the church of God. The church of God is members, not an organization, not a church group, not a church building. It is the individual members of God, and each one of us have to be keeping the commandments of God and more. We have to be following that instruction God gave us in Luke 21:36 to be watching and praying. Those are two prerequisites that have a specific promise to us that relates to whether we fall into the category of people mentioned between verses 14 and 16 of Revelation 12, and the second category of people mentioned in verse 17. And I've mentioned it this way because this is in Revelation is largely in chronological order. And the chronology of those being accounted worthy to escape, who are the Philadelphian era, has a people who are part of that Philadelphian era, but who get left behind when the Laodicean era begins. And that Laodicean era begins, as God told us through his end-time apostle expressly, it begins when the fifth seal commences. And that begins after those accounted worthy to escape have been taken on two wings of a great eagle to a place in the wilderness where she's nourished for 3.5 years, a time and times, 1 + 2, 3 years and a half, a time, 3.5 years from the face of the serpent. Now, her being flown, those accounted worthy to escape, being flown in a certain time on two wings of a great eagle, and that certain time is in between the 1290 and the 1260, because she's going to be in that place of nourishment from 1260 until the time Christ returns. And there are events that happen at the 1335, the cutting off of God's witness to the world until the two witnesses come on the scene at the 1260. And between the 1290 and the 1260, this flight's going to occur. And the devil, he ain't going to just sit by and watch that flight happen, just like wasn't going to sit by and watch ancient Israel march out of Egypt all the way over to the Promised Land. When they got to the Red Sea, he sends, well, even before that, he sends Pharaoh's army after ancient Israel. So by the time they reached the Red Sea, that army would be there, catching them, cornered as if it were, except that God did a miracle and opened up the Red Sea and created a narrow passageway for ancient Israel to get safely through. And even though the army of Pharaoh could also travel through that narrow passageway between the gelled up walls of the Red Sea, God had the power, as he did, to get ancient Israel safely through and then melt the gelling of the waters so that the waters would come crashing down upon the army of Pharaoh and drown that army. Well, there's a similar scenario. God's end-time apostle saw it related to spiritual Israel in the future for that category of God's church who are accounted worthy to escape, who fly on two wings of a great eagle to the Middle East. They're not flown all the way they're flown into the wilderness. They're not flown in, a lot of flights you take are not nonstop. They have one stop before they get on another plane and fly you to your destination. Same thing's going to happen. Read the rest of these verses, 15 and 16, tells you the same thing as a flight that's not non-stop direct is going to happen to future Israel for those accounted worthy to escape. They're going to be flown into a wilderness area where between the 1290 and 1260, where we have to watch what Jesus Christ said to watch, starting in verse 15 of Matthew 24, where he tells us at verse 15, watch for an abomination of desolation to be set up in Jerusalem, armies surrounding Jerusalem. And when you see that, he tells us to flee to the mountains. If I can turn to it fast enough, we'll take a very quick review of that before we come back to verse 15 and 16 of Revelation 12. We see in verse 15 of Matthew 24, if I can get this on the screen here for you, look at it in your own Bible. He says, wherefore, when you therefore shall see the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet, you go back and read what's before this. I got to pick up here for time's sake. When you see this happen, when you see that stand in the holy place, whoso reads, let him understand. Then, verse 16, let them which be in Judah flee into the mountains. Now, this is duality prophecy. Yes, in 70 A.D., we had those in Jerusalem have to flee to the mountains. The temple of God was destroyed in Jerusalem. But this also applies to the time today. Christ is speaking this as he speaks in context with praying that your flight be not in the winter, neither on the Sabbath day. For then shall be great tribulation, such as was not since the beginning of the world to this time. This is all a future event. Yes, that part of it happened in 70 A.D., but the big, true, real, grandiose duality part of this happening of fleeing is going to happen again in the future when we see an army again surround Jerusalem. Let them that be in Judea flee into the mountains. Well, the mountains from Jerusalem are to the southeast, across the Jordan River. There's a narrow passageway that reminded God's end-time apostle of the gelled-up walls of the Red Sea. And it's the walls in the area of Petra that have a narrow passageway between those huge rock walls. And when we're told we got to flee there when we see that army surround, and look in verse 15 of Revelation 12, we see that after those accounted worthy to escape are flown into the wilderness, it's a repeat, a duality repeat, not exactly the same way, but in principle, essentially, it's a repeat of ancient Israel escaping Egypt, being cornered at the Red Sea, and Pharaoh sending his army after them. The devil's going to repeat that with modern spiritual Israel, those accounted worthy to escape in that category of the true church. To the woman, I've emphasized this many times, in prophecy, a woman is a church. There's duality in this. There's a true church and there's a false church. In chapter 12, we're talking about the true church. The false church, woman, is mentioned in chapter 17 of Revelation, that woman that rides the beast and controls that beast. But we're told in verse 15, the serpent, which verse 9 describes over here as that serpent, that old serpent, great dragon, is the devil and Satan. He's called the devil and Satan. So it's the devil's army. And the serpent cast out of his mouth. Water is a flood, and prophecy is an army. Used that way all throughout the Old Testament. And so the devil sends an army after the woman, that he might cause her to be carried away of his army. But God steps in and intervenes, just like he did with the waters of the Red Sea that he had crash in upon Pharaoh's army. He's going to do it a little different, but he's going to knock off the army of the devil that the devil sends after those accounted worthy to escape, who are flown into the wilderness. You know, this is a specific wilderness prepared of God, where she's nourished, and it's described in Daniel chapter 11, verses 40 and 41, as the only area recorded in the Bible that's protected from the king of the north, the beast, during the time of the Great Tribulation, which time this is. And God's going to cause the earth to help the woman, and the earth opened her mouth. What happens when the earth opens her mouth? A sinkhole appears. Sometimes it's followed by or in conjunction with an earthquake. Sometimes it's just a sinkhole that opens up. Either way, when you open up a hole underneath a bunch of rocks, those rocks are going to come crashing down into the hole on top of that army that the devil sent after the portion of the woman who's accounted worthy to escape on two wings of a great eagle. It's not only going to kill the devil's army, it's going to block off the narrow passageway at Petra. And Petra is the most southern point of Edom. Edom, along with Moab and Ammon, are the tri-city areas of a wilderness that are mentioned as being the only place recorded in the Bible as being protected or outside the reach of the beast during the Great Tribulation. So God swallows up the army of the devil in a big sinkhole, and those who are counted worthy to escape then get safely into that area east of the Jordan River that comprises, read it in Daniel 11, verse 41, Edom, the land of the children of Ammon, and that of Moab, Ammon in the north, Moab in the middle, and Edom in the south, and the southernmost tip or point of Edom is Petra. Edom is mentioned in the Bible. Rocks are mentioned in the Bible. Don't say Petra is not mentioned in the Bible. It is. And it's to the southeast. It's where the mountains are, and it's the entrance through the mountains to this wilderness area God's prepared to protect those who are accounted worthy to escape and be flown on two wings of a great eagle. Christ telling us, pray that your flight be not in the winter, and that being part of what's promised as an escape to those who watch and pray by Christ in Luke 21:36. But all of this happens for those in the category of those who are of the true church accounted worthy to escape. The other natural corollary of that, those who are not accounted worthy to escape, they are like a division that's called a remainder or a remnant. They're a remnant. They're a leftover of the main part of the church. They're part of the church and they keep God's commandments. But in time order, once those who are accounted worthy to escape have been flown, chased by the devil's army swallowed up, and that's it. Those who get into that place of safety who are accounted worthy of it are in there. Now in time order, those who were not accounted worthy to take this trip and get into that place of safety, they're a remnant. They're left behind. They're of her seed, of the woman of the true church. They're the second category. They're those who were not accounted worthy to escape. So here they are now, left as a remnant, left as like a sheep that strays behind the rest of the sheep, that goes forward. And there are a few that are left behind. That's who the lion attacks, the remnant, those strays. Those left behind that are part of the remnant are like strays. They were not accounted worthy to escape. They were keeping God's commandments, but they apparently were not doing Luke 21:36, watching and praying. We got to go over and above keeping the commandments, brethren. And so I'm trying to emphasize for those who argue this against me, that look, the Laodicean era is not here yet. God's end-time apostle said it commences when the fifth seal begins. And that makes sense because the fifth seal is going to be a time of the worst time of trouble ever. It's going to have the mark of the beast, which basically are two things. You do what those in Daniel chapter 5 we just covered today had to do when they played the music. They were required to bow down and worship the image of the beast. Even though the king regretted having made that law, he did. A future emperor will make that a law. He may regret it later, maybe, maybe not. But same thing. You'll have to worship the image of the beast to receive the mark. Or you have your head cut off, or you're burned at the stake, or you're killed in some other horrible, terrible way as a martyr of God. The other element, beside worshiping the image of the beast, is to work on the Sabbath. And those who refuse to do that, they're like those who refuse to worship the image of the beast. They have their head cut off. They're burned at the stake or split in half between two trees or two horses or whatever else they think up to do to you, to those who are left behind as a remnant. But that works for those left behind because God tells those left behind, I'll do this real quick and then we got to close up. And I mean this in a positive way. It's better to be accounted worthy to escape, not even have to be troubled or consider this at all. But in Revelation 3, in the 9 verses that are addressed directly to the Laodiceans, verse 17 of chapter 12 is an indirect verse addressed to the Laodiceans. Oh, maybe you could call it direct. But between verses 14 over here and 22 at the end of that chapter, right in the middle of the address to the Laodiceans, first of all, 4 verses that describe her condition, thinking she's got it made when she really is missing the mark. And verses 19 saying Christ will come. That's when he'll knock on people's door and say, I'll come, and if you will endure martyrdom as I endured it, you'll be in the first resurrection with me. You'll come up ahead of those who remain alive on the earth, because the dead in Christ, as a martyr, you'll be dead in Christ if you have to do this. And you come up first ahead of those who remain alive by a few seconds or whatever it's going to be. But you're told here in verse 18, the very center verse, there's 4 after it, there's 4 before it that address the Laodiceans. I counsel those of you who are left behind, who are not given the 2 wings of a great eagle, to fly to the Middle East and be chased by the devil and wind up in this place of nourishment for 3.5 years. I counsel you who are left behind to buy of me gold tried in the fire. And God's end-time apostle has explained that this is the fiery trial of martyrdom. And he's counseling you to do this so that you may be rich and have white raiment, that you may be clothed, and that the shame of your nakedness not appear. Anoint your eyes with eye salve, that you may see. And so that, here's the rest of it, so that you can sit with him in his throne. And this is the way you're going to have to do it if you're a Laodicean. You're going to have to do it via buying of God gold tried in the fiery trial of martyrdom. Because you're going to be left behind for a time where you're exposed to a beast who has dominion over the entire world, except for that area where those accounted worthy to escape are taken, east of the Jordan River. You're going to have to work on the Sabbath, bow down before the image of the beast, or be thrown in the lion's den. And in this case, God's telling you to do it, that I buy this fire of him, and yeah, you'll be delivered from the beast, but you'll be either burned up or have your head cut off or however they martyr you, just as Christ was. And Christ says, he encourages you here, he that overcomes endures to the end, endures martyrdom as Christ endured it. You'll sit with him on his throne. You'll be at the wedding supper, and you'll be as part of the first resurrection. I only pitch this to those of you who find yourselves, oh man, I didn't do enough watching and praying, and therefore I wasn't accounted worthy to escape, and I'm stuck. What do I do now? Well, you do this. Buy of God gold tried in the fiery trial of martyrdom. That's your only option. You can't cheat on it. You can't work on the Sabbath. You can't bow down one knee before the image of the beast and say, well, I'll just work 5 minutes. I'll just bow one knee down and fake off this old beast, stay alive. Well, what are you going to stay alive for? When the 7th seal hits after the 6th seal, 2.5 years into the Great Tribulation, the year-long day of the Lord, the worst time of the most troublesome part of the 3.5 years of the Great Tribulation begins to occur for the last year of it, in the day of the Lord, with God pouring out his punishment upon those who took the mark of the beast. This is exactly opposite of taking the mark of the beast. This is refusing to worship the image of the beast. This is refusing to work on the Sabbath. And as a consequence, you'll buy of God gold in the fiery trial of martyrdom. You will be martyred by the help of the devil and his beast. So what you need to buy, you buy from the devil. He's going to be glad to give you martyrdom. You just don't work on the Sabbath. You just don't bow down before the image of the beast. You got it. You bought the gold. You're in the kingdom. You could have done it easier by doing Luke 21:36. And we'll close with that. I know I'm maybe a minute or two overtime. I haven't looked at the clock, but I know I only had a few minutes. I'm probably gone a little bit past it, but for your sake, I'm doing it. All right, let's see. Make sure we're in chapter 21. That's chapter 20. Chapter 21 begins down here. 21, so we want to go to verse 36. Watch you therefore, because that fifth seal, when it commences, it comes unexpectedly on all them that dwell on the face of the whole earth. Tout le monde, everybody in the world is caught off guard by this. Therefore, you who are wise, watch and pray. Pray for those affected by the first four active seals that God's been explaining here in plain language, so that you can escape what he explained about the fifth seal being the worst time of trouble ever to hit the face of the earth in a great tribulation. He says, you can be accounted worthy to escape it. Escape all these things that shall come to pass, beginning with the opening of the fifth seal, great tribulation, the beginning of the great seal tribulation. It's open to our understanding, but when it begins to happen, we can be accounted worthy to escape it, and we can be accounted worthy to stand before the Son of Man in the first resurrection as a consequence. These go hand in glove. If you're not accounted worthy to escape, you're also not accounted worthy of the first resurrection, standing before the Son of Man, as God's end-time apostle rightly explained that in Scripture, backs that up. But God gives you a way out, since, you got caught off guard. It became part of the Laodicean era as it began when the Great Tribulation commenced with the opening of the fifth seal, the beginning of the fifth seal, Great Tribulation, requiring people to bow down before the image of the beast and work on the Sabbath. You don't do it, you've bought the gold of the fiery trial of martyrdom, and you're in. Maybe not like Flynn, because it's going to be a hard way to be in, but and Christ, even the night before his crucifixion, was sweating as if it were blood. And I see that I'm over time, brethren, so I hope this has been beneficial to you. We will pick up with chapter 8 of Daniel in the Bible study next Friday night. If you want to review it ahead of time, you're welcome and encouraged to do that. And otherwise, I hope what I've given you will help you want to do the watching and praying. Between now and Friday night Bible study, it takes a big effort to watch the news of the day and sort it out as to what parts of the news relate to the first seal, what parts relate to the second seal. I got wood on the screen like that great tree. And what part relates to the other seals of the third and fourth seal of famine, pestilence, and death by various things. Death by disease epidemics, death by wild animals, death by... let's see, what else he got in there? They got by disease epidemics, death by wild animals, death by seismus, meaning seismic condition on the earth, on the ground, like earthquakes and tsunamis and volcanic eruptions and commotions up in the air, such as hurricanes of all kinds. But I'm over time. I got to go. I was just going to open it up where we'll pick up next time. We're going to pick up next time Friday night Bible study with chapter 8 of Daniel. And actually, I'm sorry, we're not. We're going to finish. We hadn't finished chapter 7. We only got part way into chapter 7. We'll pick up in the midst of chapter 7 with the Friday night Bible study. Until next time, brethren, and for the rest of the Sabbath, Stephen Lloyd Gilbert, I want to wish you a happy Sabbath, Shabbat Shalom, and remind you that if you missed the Bible study last night, it is in the archive already on Sabbath.tv, which will take you to cogtv.org, and you'll find our website there with a button on the right side that is labeled Archive Video. That's your menu selection over on the right. You press that button, and you can go to, I'll just show you real quick, and then we'll go. I hit the Archive Video button. The Archive Video page opens up, and under the purple dot, See Sabbath Video, look for last night's date. 11/25 of this year, 2022. November 25 was last night, Friday night Bible study. Oh, I need to change the wording. Let's see. 11/20. Yeah, it's here already. Bible study continuing in the book of Daniel. We did that chapter 3 last night. And if you just press on that text, let me get that to light up. You press that text right there. It's all underlined. It'll take you to a YouTube with last night's Bible study in it.
Brethren, good evening.
All right, see?
Happy Sabbath.
I need to stop it.
Shalom for this.
That's what you'll get. Real easy. You get last night's Bible study by going to the Archive Video page and then pressing that button for last night's Bible study. Yeah. We got 10 years worth, so if you scroll down, you can go all the way back to 2010. You'll do it in several layers, but you can get all the way back to 2010. But here's last night's Bible study right here. So if you missed that, I encourage you to catch that because we covered chapter 3 of Daniel. Brethren, I got to get out of here. Till next time, your host, Stephen Lloyd Gilbert. Happy Sabbath. Shabbat Shalom.